Physical geology is the scientific study of physical features of the Earth's surface. Landforms are developed by various geological processes which are active over the Earth's surface. There are both exogenous and endogenous geological processes which will be creating these landforms. The notable geological processes which are acting over the Earth's surface are weathering, mass wasting, erosion, transportation and deposition. These are all the geomorphic processes which will be sculpturing the land surface and creating varieties of landforms over the Earth's surface. A geological agent is an Earth's mass movement mechanism which is capable of eroding, transporting and depositing the mass removed from one place and deposited in another place. And these activities like erosion, transportation and deposition are under the influence of the various interactive mechanisms expected between the atmosphere, hydrosphere and lithosphere. So a geological agent is capable of carrying out erosion, transportation and deposition of different Earth's materials from one place to the other. The notable geological agents which are working over the Earth's surface are the running water, glaciers, waves and currents in the coastal zone, groundwater, wind and lakes. Today we are going to see the geological action of wind over the Earth's surface. All of us are aware that wind is a powerful geological agent which has got an effective force of removing material and mass from one place to the other. Wind has got the effective force of removing mass from the Earth's surface. Even with little velocity, wind can remove the finest particles present over the Earth's surface and they can be deposited in some other place. Wind is capable of eroding, transporting and depositing the dusty materials and sand grains in different places. Wind is also a part of weather. A hot, moist day may suddenly become colder depending upon the wind blow which we have on that day. A hot, moist day may suddenly become cold if wind blows from a cool area. Wind may also blow the clouds away and the rain may disappear from a place. Wind also can carry a storm to greater distances. Winds are named according to the direction and also the speed, and wind has got its own velocity. Depending upon the direction, we can say the wind is blowing or flowing from one place to the other. If a wind flows or blows from east to west, we can call that wind as easterly wind. If a wind blows from west to east, we can call that wind as westerly wind. And depending upon the speed also, we can classify winds into different categories. Gentle breeze will always have roughly about 12 to 19 kilometers per hour velocity, and if the velocity increases to 39 to 49 kilometers per hour, we can call that as a strong breeze. And gale is a wind which has got a movement of 50 to 100 kilometers per hour, and storm has got a velocity of more than 100 to 110 kilometers per hour speed, and hurricanes will be having a velocity of more than 110 to 120 kilometers per hour. So depending upon the velocity, the action of wind can be expected over the land surface. Erosion is the process of removing material from one place to the other, and it is a mechanical or chemical destruction of the land surface materials and removal of these materials by various geological agents also. Aeolian landforms are the landforms developed by wind. So the wind formed landforms are called Aeolian landforms, and today we are going to see the Aeolian landforms developed by wind. Wind is air moving across the Earth's surface. Wind may also blow so slowly and gently that it can hardly felt by us, or it may blow very fast that it can smash the buildings and push us over larger masses also, or trees also. Sometimes trees may be falling down depending upon the movement of the wind. There are strong winds which can wipe up the great oceanic waves, which can even break the ships in some of the places. And wind can also blow away soil from farmlands and can also spoil the crops which are grown in the farmlands. And sharp grains of dust carried by wind can wear away rocks and materials which are present over the earth's surface. And the work of the wind comprises of various processes like deflation, corrosion, and transportation and deposition. And all these processes of wind like deflation, corrosion, transportation and deposition are all interrelated to each other. And these activities of wind are very active over the deserts and continental landforms. Deflation is a process which can be able to blow out the rock masses from the basement rock. And deflation means blowing out and scattering of rock particles by wind. And the term deflation comes from a Latin phrase called deflare, which means blow away the material. The surface of deserts is always covered by diverse fragments of rock materials and sand, and these materials will be removed by the blowing action of air which is coming from the jets, and sand and other rock particles can be removed by this air. And deflation first clears the sand grains and also the finer particles which are present nearer the surface, and they will be leaving the coarser fragments over the surface. Sometimes these boulders will also be forming the rocky deserts which will be left by the wind, which have not been carried away by the wind. And such rocks are again fragmented and also weathered by the other geological processes, and then subsequently the worn out materials will be carried away by the wind through deflation. And deflation is a process which can be able to be expected over the dry lands where wind action is always there. And the second process of wind which will be active for erosion is the corrosion. Corrosion is a process of abrasion, and the particles which are removed by wind from one place will be forcefully hitting the rock mass at another place. So the action of wind in association with the particles transported by the wind is called as corrosion. Corrosion is a forceful action of sandy particles carried by wind, and the forceful action of these sand grains over the rock bodies will be able to remove some finer materials above the surface, and that action is known as corrosion. And corrosion can do many activities above the surface of the rocks, and corrosion can create grooving, scarring, polishing and grinding activities over the rocks. And the intensity of corrosion depends on the size and density of the carrying materials by the wind, and also the nature of the material present over the rocks. And if the rocks are very soft, the removal is very rapid. Ventifacts are the structures created by the activity of the wind. Most of the activities are done by the wind in association with the existing rocks, and the rocks that are exposed to the sand blasting of the prevailing winds become pitted, grooved and polished by the activity of the wind. And the facets which are present towards the direction or along the direction of the wind will be formed in the form of a structure which will be having the striations along the wind direction, and that will be called as ventifacts. So ventifacts are the striations created by the wind blow over a rocky surface in association with the materials transported. Here we are seeing some of the landscapes and ventifacts created by the action of wind over a plain. And ripples can also be generated by the wind over the deserts, and ripples are the movements shown by the wind, and ripples are the landforms or landscapes created by the wind over the deserty terrain. When we talk about the movement of wind over the sand bodies, we will have to speak about the windward and leeward side of the wind above the sand bodies. And this particular diagram shows the windward and leeward direction of a wind which is moving along the sand body, which will be sculptured by the wind. We are also speaking about the slopes of the sand bodies, which will be placing the materials from one place to the other, and the slope may be gentle in one side and it may be steep at the other side, depending upon the activity or depending upon the mobility of mass. The slope will be varying with reference to time and space along the deserts. In some places, larger hill-sized features sculptured by the wind are called as yardangs. This feature is a very typical feature which can be expected over the plains, and wind erosion over the hilly or rocky outcrops will be creating these yardangs, and these yardangs are common in deserts around the places all over the world, and they can also be seen in Mars and other planets. And here you are seeing the fine dust removed by the wind and deposited in another place, and the nature of the particles removed by the wind can be seen in this diagram. The wind-borne fragments are normally taken away by suspension in the air, and they are lifted roughly about 1.5 meters above the ground surface, and wind can sometimes create valleys, cliffs and ridges over the land surface. Whirlwinds can be spirally moving the mass, which you might have seen in different parts of the lands, and whirlwinds are the spiral motion of wind particles in deserts also. And depending upon the nature of the rocks present over the earth's surface, the action of wind can be varying, and in hard rocks or soft rocks, the activity of the wind will be differing depending upon the resistance of the rock bodies which are present. Depending upon the hardness of the rocks, deflation or corrosion will be removing the mass, and if the rocks are already deformed, then it will be very easy for the wind to carry away the materials in suspension and transport them to distant places. Alternating beds which will be having hard and soft rocks in sequence will be having differential rate of erosion by the wind also. The soft rocks will be eroded by wind very easily, and the hard rocks cannot be very easily eroded. So depending upon the nature of the rocks present over the landscape, the erosion will be there by the wind, and the hard and soft rocks will be forming different beds and bed-like structures over the earth's surface. Sometimes we will be able to get mushroom-like structures wherein the resistive hard rock will be at the top and the eroded soft rocks will be at the bottom. Thereby we will be getting a structure like a mushroom, and in some places, depending upon the presence of the iron and manganese minerals which will be acting with the water vapor present in the atmosphere, there will be a thin film like substance created above the surface which will be forming like a polished varnish, which are called as desert varnish. So desert varnish is a typical structure which we can expect over the rock bodies, where wind action in association with the water vapor present in the atmosphere will be creating a filmy surface which will be very hard enough, and that will be standing above the land mass. And desert varnish can be seen in some places where a typical rock containing iron and manganese minerals are present. The wind action is promoted by various other agents also, or factors also. The notable factors which can contribute for wind erosion are the climate, the weathering, and the absence of vegetation in a place, and the absence of rainwater and moisture. As and when we get rainwater, the rainwater will be acting like a geological agent separately. So wind will not be able to lift the materials away, because most of the water saturated materials cannot be lifted by the wind. The next process of the action of wind is the transportation. Wind can also lift particles from one place to the other, and the velocity will be controlling the movement of these particles. At wind velocities up to 6.5 meters per second, dust or fine sand of 0.25 millimeter diameter can be carried away from one place to the other. If the velocity increases to about 10 meters per second, even sand grains of 1 millimeter can be lifted away from one place to the other. And if the velocity of wind increases to about 20 meters per second, then particles of up to 4 millimeter to 5 millimeter diameters can be transported from one place to the other. And hurricanes, particularly hurricanes, are very effective and destructive winds, and hurricanes can carry even small stones from one place to the other. The dust of African sand bodies or deserts can be transported by strong trade winds up to a distance of 2000 to 2500 kilometers away from the place of origin. And sometimes the dust particles which are transported by the hurricanes will be spread over the atmosphere, and they can even obscure the sunlight which are falling over the land also, which can be seen in some places. And the sand movement along the slopes by natural action of gravity or by the action of wind is called as saltation. And saltation is the rolling down of the sand grains due to little velocity which is created by the wind. And wind movement along the slopes can create saltation. And wind drives airborne materials from one height to the slopy land, and then they will be bouncing down on the floors. The desert landforms, or the landforms generated by wind, are classified into sand dunes, loess deposits, blowout deposits, or desert pavements. The sand relief forms which are classified based on the sand relief forms and wind conditions are like this. One is the Burchen sands, the second one is the overgrown sands, and the third one is the dune sands. These are all the sand relief forms which can be expected in different places. And the first feature, erosional feature of a wind, is the Burchen sands. Burchen is a Turkish term, and it denotes the asymmetric crescent shaped dunes which are existing perpendicular to the prevailing wind direction. And the wings of these Burchens are extending along the direction of the wind, and Burchens have a long and gentle windward slope also. So Burchens are crescent shaped sand dunes which can be expected over the land surface, and they are all asymmetric in shape. And Burchens can be depending upon the direction of the wind and also the nature of the material present over the sand dunes, will be occurring alone or in association with additional number of sand dunes also. And the height of these Burchens may be ranging from 1 meter to 15 meters, and also the width of the Burchens may be about 40 to 70 meters also. And the Burchens also may occur in groups, or Burchens may be compounded to form a ridgy sand body. And the next feature which can be expected by wind are the dunes. A dune is a mound or ridge of loose sand that has been deposited by wind. Dunes are common in all sandy regions, and they are all found along the coastal regions, near the river banks, and also lakes, and also in some of the deserts. So dunes may be long and narrow or shaped like a crescent also. Some dunes have 3 or more ridges that extend from a high central peak also. In some areas, large dunes may reach up to a height of 300 meters also. Dune fields may contain 1 or more dunes which will be in association with the other dunes, and extremely large areas of dunes in the Sahara and other deserts, we call them as dune fields. Dunes always will be migrating from one place to the other depending upon the movement of wind, and many dunes migrate across the land, and wind removes the sand grains on one side of the sand and deposit at the other side of the dune. Many dunes migrate across the land as the wind removes sand grains on one side of the dune and deposits them on the other side of the dune. The migrating dunes can block roads, houses, and destroy the agricultural lands also. And the next activity of wind is the deposition of the materials carried by the wind from one place to the other. And the deposition of the mass by wind may create 2 types of structures or landforms. One is the loess, another one is the takirs. Loess is a kind of silt that forms a fertile topsoil in some parts of the world, and loess consists of tiny mineral particles brought by wind to the places where they now lie, and loess is a depositional landform created by wind. And loess contains mineral particles which are finer than the sand which can be expected in other sand dunes, and the topsoil is made up of very fine particles, and such regions can be seen in the central and northwestern parts of the United States, and in the central and eastern part of the Europe, and also in the eastern part of China. So loess can be seen in different places, and especially the finer particles will be containing the minerals which are typical for erosion and transportation by wind. And takirs are the flat, smooth, clayey desert patches which can be expected to be formed by the wind at the time of deposition of these materials, and most of the clayey materials transported by the wind will be forming a basin like structure wherein the fine particles will be at the center, and the coarser and very coarse grains will be at the periphery of the takirs. And takirs are the accumulated fine dust in deserts, which can be seen in typical places of deserts, and the periphery will always be having coarser fragments in takirs. Takir is also a depositional feature created by the wind. So today we have seen the erosional, transportational and depositional activity of the wind, and wind can be a very effective geological agent wherein the landforms are generated by wind depending upon the mass available on the land surface. So the burchens, the dunes and other structures which we are expecting over the land surface are generated by winds, and the loess deposits or takir deposits are created by wind. Wind is a dynamic geological agent. The activity of wind varies from place to place and also with reference to time. Wind can enact time variant changes on the landscapes, and wind erosion is a major problem in several parts of the world, and vegetation can control the erosion of wind. And wind is a powerful agent where wind energy can be generated by the typical velocity of wind which we get it, and wind energy can be generated depending upon the zones where we get the frequent and regular blowing of wind, and wind energy is being harnessed in different places. Wind is having both destructive and constructive mechanisms, and today we have seen the erosional and depositional features of wind. Wind is an effective geological agent. Thank you.